compared to some other instruments like electric bass or guitar, I consider that there are still a lot of exploration to be done with the bass. I mean, there are a lot of people are creating great stuff, but strangely, I think that there's still a lot of place to, have an idea and develop it by your own and build your own musical world around one or two of those ideas.
I'm so glad that Discover Double Bass is out there. Geoff Chalmers and the team of tutors that he's assembled on that site. It's a great chance to do an interview about a topic. I've been doing that several times here on the podcast, and today's episode is another one of those. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations, and we are speaking today with Olivier Babaz. I don't even know how to describe Olivier. Jazz Bowing is the title of his new course. It's linked up in the show notes, so definitely check it out or just search for it online. And I get so excited when these courses come out from Discover Double Bass because I know I'm going to learn something new. I fire them up, I get on my bass, and with Adam Ben Ezra, I was practicing with his slapping techniques. With John Goldsby, I'm walking lines. Danny Zeman, I've gone through and practiced various things. These jazz courses are super helpful for me because I'm not much of a jazz bass player myself. And Olivier's, oh my goodness, it is just so cool what he does with the bow and these sounds I didn't even know you could get on the bass. And we dig into that with today's talk and much more. I mean, I've been using this thing with my students. It's so exciting because I practice something. It's something I never even thought you could do. Then I have a student come over in a couple hours. We fire up that lesson, watch 2 or 3 minutes. I teach it to him, and it's just such a cool win-win for performers, teachers, whatever genre. So you're going to learn, in addition to the course, we'll talk through Olivier's backstory and staying inspired, which is a topic I think is really interesting. And yeah, great chat. Quick shout out to our sponsors: D'Addario Strings, Upton Bass, A440 Violin Shop, the Bass Violin Shop, Steve Swan String Bass, and the Texas Hill Country Bass Collective. More on them later, but let's dig into this conversation with Olivier Babaz. I knew that Geoff was doing a course with you, and so I thought, what a perfect opportunity to chat. And then I realized it's coming out like tomorrow. I think the course. I think the official date out is tomorrow. I think 7, and we still have to confirm. But it's really how do you say that? Hot in the oven. Like it's really ready to go. I mean, if it's not tomorrow, it's during this week or very close. Yeah, and it looks great. I've watched all 3 of the preview videos. You got the pizzicato and Arco pizzicato phrases played with the bow, I think it's called, or something like that. And you're talking about the lessons that are on YouTube, right? Like the preview lessons, exactly. Yeah. And then one on slapping, which is cool. I always I know I'm gonna dig what I'm watching when it makes me want to run over to my bass and try what I'm watching. So I totally did that. I was watching, and I love the groove. It's such groovy playing that you got in those. I mean, and your other playing as well, obviously. But like that, so I went over to my bow and my bass, and I started messing around. And I have a carbon fiber bow, so I was getting some pretty good slaps with that. Great. Yeah. So I mean, you can slap with wooden bow, but it's at your own risk. It's really like. You know how it is, it will damage it, but it's, if you got a decent solid bow, it's great to experience with that kind of sound. But I'm pretty sure in some classical repertoire and probably some orchestra excerpt of modern stuff, there are some things like this. And maybe in contemporary music, and maybe not even with a bow or with a stick or anything, I'm probably sure that it already exists and it's already being used. Yeah, for sure. No, I remember playing some pretty fearsome, fortissimo passages, Colegno, with the bow, and that's when I'd bring the carbon fiber bow on stage also and get that, give that one a workout. But it's very cool. So I can't wait to check out the whole course. Great. Maybe we could just start with your background growing up in France, finding your way to Montreal. Just tell me a little bit about your backstory. Yeah, sure. I'm originally from France. I'm from Paris. I mean, suburban of Paris. I grew up with a lot of blues and rock culture, and I started playing music
probably when I was 10 or 11 with the guitar, of course. Like a lot of us, music changed my life, especially at that age. It was really nice. I really very soon began to be interested in bass, and the acoustic side was always there. And so quite quickly I took, bass and acoustic bass, upright bass in a more self-taught and discovery way, so by myself. And then later I went deeper into the jazz thing, and I studied in multiple schools in France, in Nancy. And Nancy, I went to a lot of places, to a lot of different. And then what I mean is afterwards I went back to Conservatoire for really the more technical aspect of double bass. I really felt like I needed some foundations into my playing. So I went back to Conservatoire, so both in jazz, but especially for classical bass. And I kind of made my own little path through it. I went to live as well in the Netherlands for 2 years. And I had the opportunity, after studying a year with some people from here, I had the opportunity to go live in Réunion Island, which is a French island in the Indian Ocean. It's a really great place. Got probably 900,000 inhabitants there, so you can make a living as a gigging musician. Of course, I'm not in the classical world, but playing jazz, and there are some festivals, some clubs, all the hotel scene. You can work for local jazz musicians. And I had many opportunities there. I stayed there for 5 years. I went back in Paris for 1 year for studying at the Centre des Musiques Didier Lockwood. So it's a school which was built by the French violin player Didier Lockwood, and it has a strong specialty with strings and jazz. So mainly of course violins, but there are some cellists there, and it's very open to the Arco playing on the bass. And that was probably 2005 something, and I already was in Conservatoire, and I already was within my jazz career at the time, was already experiencing a lot with the bow. So it was this school, Didier Lockwood School, was a great place to push it a little forward. And then back to Réunion Island for a few years, and I had the opportunity to come to Montreal and Canada for touring, and that's where the little how do you say that, fire sparked. The little idea came to maybe come check it out here. And so in 2009 we arrived here. Little old school, old-fashioned way, like no real contacts. We discovered everything here, and we built a new life here. It was great. And so jam session, jazz scene, meeting everybody. I came back to school, to university for composition as well. So Montreal has been very good for me until now. So that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I've heard Montreal. I've heard from several people what a thriving jazz scene Montreal has. Is that true? Has it got?
Yeah, it's strange because Montreal is very known for its jazz festival, which is huge and which is very known. But the local music scene is extremely rich and resourceful, and you have very rich university. You have a lot of universities and a lot of colleges teaching, a lot of great musicians teaching, and so it brings a lot of people from here. And I would say this bicultural French-speaking, English-speaking thing going on here is really, really good for the music scene. So it's very creative, very powerful. It's not a huge city, like it's not as big as New York City, but it's extremely creative. A lot of albums of creative people. I really like it here.
Oh, very cool. Well, you talk about forging your own path, and you definitely seem to, at least from my perspective, as someone who's really created an interesting musical world for themselves. I mean, from the bass and kalimba, which I'd love to chat about, to just like the fact that and I'll be sure to link up to all of these videos we talked about at the beginning with you and Geoff Chalmers. Especially, you have an interview video up on YouTube right now with Geoff, and it was interesting hearing about. I think you brought up that you're not really from the classical world. You're from, guitar and the blues world. And that's interesting because most people, I would call myself like an Arco first player, or, I started on violin and then, and the jazz thing came later. So it's interesting how your career has become so, entwined with the bow when, you think of that as, that's really interesting how that's so prominent in your playing.
Yeah, to me, the double bass is an instrument where there are still a lot of exploration possibilities. It's an instrument where that is sometimes taught a little bit in a conservative way. It's not in a bad way. It's not in a bad way. Conservative means solid as well and founded, so that's great. But I consider it, compared to some other instruments like electric bass or guitar, I consider that there are still a lot of exploration to be done with the bass. There are a lot of people are creating great stuff, but strangely, I think that there's still a lot of place to, have an idea and develop it by your own and build your own musical world around one or two of those ideas. So that's where the bow is for me. Around 2003 or something, I really started to dig into it and to explore with it. And so I really went back to Conservatoire and do all this work. It's my little own quest. And the kalimba things, it's kind of the same. It's just a personal way to do stuff.
When I was recently chatting with Gary and Eric of Upton Bass, I asked them, how did they do what they do? How do they build their presence and be so top of mind among bassists around the world? Here's what they said.
My ego doesn't want to say this, right? And Eric's won't like it either. But because of the timing, we couldn't do again what we've done.
Yeah. And what they have done is absolutely extraordinary. From their beginnings as an accessories shop online to now making over 120 basses a year. They're coming up, as I record this, on 1,700 basses. They've got an army of satisfied customers who bought multiple basses. They're just really doing great things. They do great work and stand behind their products. Check them out at uptonbass.com. And thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast, guys. D'Addario's Zayek strings are really interesting. They're synthetic gut strings. And here is D'Addario string specialist Lyris Hung on what makes these strings so special.
Zayek is our only synthetic string for bass at the moment. And that is made with a peak core. It's actually called Zayek. It's the Zayek core. And that for those strings, you'll notice they're slightly thicker in diameter, the Zayek, than, say, the Kaplan or the helicore, and primarily a product of the synthetic core being lower mass. So because it's lower mass, it needs more of it. And so we use, kind of a big bundle of that fiber for the core, and then we wind with higher mass materials on the outside.
Learn more about these and all D'Addario strings at contrabassconversations.com/strings. This episode is brought to you by the Bass Violin Shop, which opened in 2001 as a small double bass workshop in Greensboro, North Carolina. Today, they're staffed by 3 full-time, highly skilled bass luthiers, and they specialize in double bass sales, rentals, setup, restoration, and repair. For nearly 20 years, they have satisfied thousands of clients by offering quality instruments, knowledgeable service, reliable repairs, and superior restorations at affordable prices. Did you know that they regularly ship basses nationally from coast to coast? Contact their team to find out more information about the shipping process and how you can get your dream bass delivered to your doorstep. For more information and current inventory, visit their website at bassviolinshop.com and be sure to follow them on Facebook and Instagram. Well, it's really interesting. I have a student coming by later on today, and I'm gonna experiment with some of those techniques you were doing in that pizzicato phrases played with the bow video, and I love it. And what you, and again, I'll link up to this for folks to check out. But I love, you play something with pizzicato, and then you play it with the bow with a similar kind of phrasing. That's something I think is really interesting about your Arco, or at least some of your Arco playing, is how I can hear like what I might do pizzicato. I can hear that coming out in the bow, and I always feel like always feel like such a disaster when I pick up the bow and try to take a jazz solo. Like I don't know what to do. Like, am I vibrating? Am I like playing a concerto? Am I playing everything separate? And it's like I'm really looking forward to. First of all, folks should just check out that video to see you, because you break it down in such a logical way, with these like ideas. But I can't wait to see how you lay all that out in course form. I think it's really. There's nothing out there like it,
Oh, great! Yeah. The main thing is not. For this exact thing you were talking about. To me, my approach is that it's not so much a technical aspect or a technical difficulty. We are always like thinking about. We are a lot thinking about technical stuff and I'm talking improvisation there. But the main difficulty, and there are a lot of technical challenges with all the bow techniques, but the main thing for me is to hear music with the different sounds of the bow instead of hearing music with the different sounds of the pids. Because as an improvising player, and it's very instinctive to play with that pizzicato sound. We all listen to a lot of great jazz artists playing great pizzicato, but there are not so many influence with the bow. There are some, and there are some great players. We could talk about them, but it's really interesting to just. We always when we take the bow and find it really hard to play a jazz standard or a jazz solo, it's not obviously because of the technical side of everything, like are you in pitch, are you vibrating, am I doing the right thing with the bow. It may be as well because maybe we don't hear so much the music with that kind of sound. So the thing to go from pits to Arco, that kind of exercise, and especially to do very short phrase and really do them in a very linked fashion is just a way to translate between both languages and both instruments. It's just like mimicking something, but it's impossible to do exactly the same. So you have to pick up certain part of it, and sometimes you have to do it all over again. And building a technique with the Arco that you can improvise with is to me very different than building a classical technique where some techniques have a certain sound, and for example bow direction or bow parts have a different kind of sound or flavor. With the improvisation, you kind of have to be able to do a little bit of everything in any direction, in any bow part, and not think too much about it. That's my approach to it.
Yeah, well, and that you open up all these sonic possibilities with the bow. It's super interesting. It's like adding this whole new sound world to what you can do, and flipping between, and then the way your approach to slapping with the bow. You open up this percussive sound world that's really interesting, and all in that again you have many projects out there. So, but I'm just thinking about these couple videos I was just noticing how many different kinds of slapping sounds you can get. Like if you're slapping on the E string versus the G string versus right up close to the bridge over the fingerboard, and you get these big thunky bass sounds, and then the ghost notes, and you can get, it's this whole it's incredibly funky, and I usually don't think of funky and the bow in the same sense.
Yeah, no.
But it's so funky. How did you talk a little bit about that sound world? Like, how did you develop that? a big question, but
Yeah, I don't know. Probably, influence of great electric bass players as well. Like, Jaco Pastorius, when we're talking about ghost notes and funky stuff, it's really like all the micro rhythmic thing you can put inside a bigger rhythmic figure. It's Jaco is really like one of the leaders for that to me. And if we're talking bass players, of course, the champions, Victor Wooten or all these guys have some great way of thinking about big stuff and building all those little mini structures inside it. Otherwise, it's a little bit, I wouldn't call that funky, but when you listen to Slam Stewart, there are some really very clear rhythmic structures to it. I mean, all his solos are very, very clear rhythmically, so it's very easy. I mean, I'm talking jazz and swing there, but it's a very good foundation. I mean, this guy is really, really very inspiring. And some cello players, a lot of cello players have opened that kind of really well. Like if you're talking Ruchad Eggleston or Mike Block or all the strings player, but difficulty with the bass is the strings are so big and it really requires some strength. I mean, it's you have to have technical finesse, but there's a physical aspect to it. Like you have to really dig into the string, and then you can dial your sound from it. But yeah, there's we have to dig into the string to get some kind of stuff like that. To me,
when you're doing the slaps, I was wondering about, is it mostly an arm weight thing, or is it more of a wrist motion when you're doing those slaps? Like I was just thinking about that and thinking about like comparing it to like even just like walking a jazz bass line. Like, am I using my whole arm or am I using my finger? Like how would you describe that motion? Or maybe it changes depending on the level of slap.
I didn't analyze it at this physical level, but I would say the more of the shoulder and the back weight you put in your arm, of course, the better the sound, and the bigger and the less pressure and power you put in the wrists. To me, the better it is, because wrist is just like a little bumper. It's not really what's driving the movement. But for the slap, yeah, there's I would say it's a forearm movement. Okay. It's a forearm movement, but if you want the slap to sound good, you have to get the bass sounding but good before. So to get those fat basses, you have to put some weight and shoulder weight to it. So, but I wouldn't say it's really so much weight. It's just finding the right way to make it sound good. But there are probably other way to do it. Cello players absolutely don't do it this way. The chop or from the cello or from the violin player is generally more kind of ghost note very close to the bridge. So there is no stick hitting the string. In this case, the stick is kind of hitting the string in the same time as the hair, and the string itself is on the fingerboard. But it sounds really different depending on the bass. A lot of my students don't have the same sound, and when we're doing that in group, it's really very different depending on the bass, the strings, everything.
Do you have a lot of students that are kind of learning this style with you?
I'm not a huge teacher. Teaching is not a huge part of my activity. I teach a few students per week, but I do those workshops. I'm teaching on Skype for certain people that reach me for very specific things like this. And I'm doing those workshops maybe once every 2 or 3 months that we call Jazz et Archet, Jazz and Bow. And we've only done them in Montreal until now, but we'll probably move to another city. And those are not master classes. Those are not lessons. It's more a workshop that I drive about building, a 4x4 Arco technique for jazz, like how to survive when you get your bow out, that you have to assume having it out and doing something with it in a jazz gig. It's basically it.
Oh, well, I'd love to check out that workshop. Hopefully we can get you out to California one of these days to do that. That would be.
Oh, yeah.
You mentioned earlier Slam Stewart was a major influence. I remember you talking with Geoff about that too. And I think you mentioned a few other people, Major Holly. And then kind of on another in other side, then Mark Dresser, who is a jazz player but also explores the contemporary music world, and I think Stefano Skodnibio, I think you mentioned.
All those guys are really innovators.
Mm-hmm.
I think the one I mentioned the more is, of course, Edgar Meyer, that we all know and we all relate to in a way. But there are all those people, to me, are really innovators for beforehand. They all have a different way of building a technique, and probably all of them have different paths, but they are. I'm pretty sure a lot of them have a self-taught part to them. Because of learning. When Edgar Meyer does his crazy stuff with all those kind of bluegrass influenced huge composition with an incredible bass playing. Nobody has really done that before him, and he's kind of leading a path for a lot of people. And now we have. There's a generation of musicians really influenced by him, and probably when Major Holly or Slam Stewart did their thing, they probably invited a lot of bass players to sing along with their solo and to get the bow out of the quiver and do all that. And I'm not even talking about the contemporary guys you cite, like Mark Dresser, and they're as well in a very exploratory démarche, like path.
Yeah, well, I think you're right in there with that mix of people. And I look at someone like Mark Dresser, or like what you're doing, and talk about charting a new course for the instrumenting. Mark explores all these subtones, where he can like drop an octave, which I talk to students about that. I haven't figured out how to do that, but I talk to students about that and their eyes bug out, and charting out all the different harmonics on the bass, like what Mark has done, and the back length sounds, and then what Skodnivia did with the bass. It's really interesting. It's an instrument that it's an instrument that you're still able to kind of redefine what the bass is and what the bass can do. I think it's one of the things that's so exciting about the bass right now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the territories are still to discover. We are still at the beginning of the exploration of different styles and different techniques, because there's this huge tradition of both the classical playing, orchestral and solist, and the jazz the jazz repertoire and the way to play bass in the jazz. But there are a lot of stuff to explore, and there are some great players right now, experimenting with different stuff. And I think the main advantage, or it can sometimes be a difficulty, but at the end of it's always an advantage, is that it's an acoustic instrument. So we don't really have to fear for any competition from anything too technological, because learning to play the bass and learning to build your own path with it is the best investment in life probably you can do if you're a professional musician. It's composing, of course, is really important, but trying to have the bass go out of its normal way is great. And even in the classical world, there are some players that are really very innovative.
Outside of, obviously making this course, what sort of gigs are you playing these days? Are you on the road a lot? How much of your time is spent composing? What's that suite of activities look like for you?
But I'm a local gigging bass player from Montreal. So I mean, as how do you call that, accompagnator, as a sideman.
Yeah.
I play. It's mainly jazz. It's I would say I'm a jazz musician in a professional way, because I'm really playing a lot of new music in the clubs with with band leaders from all around Quebec. And I'm doing a little bit of playing for singers, always in the jazz thing. But I'm really a jazz musician, professionally speaking. I'm really in the jazz environment, so playing clubs, playing little concert halls, festivals, mainly Ontario and Quebec. Mm-hmm. So I would say I'm on the road regularly, but we're talking like 4 or 5 days shots. It's not huge tours. I'm not an international touring artist, and I'm a dad, so that's a good thing for now. And as well Western Canada as well, and so BC, Vancouver, and I'm French, so I try to go back at least once a year in France. And the more I go there, the more I play, and But I'm really a local musician. I'm really a local jazz guy, but what is great is within this jazz scene, it's a very nice way to expand the boundaries compared to maybe other styles or other scene. The jazz is by essence creative, so you can easily bring stuff like if we're talking bass and kalimba, it's typically that kind of scene where in certain projects some people ask me to start this kind of stuff. But yeah, I'm more a jazz gigging guy, and of course I compose and I try to record albums and push my own music.
Buying an instrument or bow is a major decision, especially the first time a student's looking for an instrument. Here's A440 Violin Shop's Michael Spadero on what he advises.
We usually start with an approximate price range, and we'll show them anything within that price range. And then to give them a little bit of context, I'll often show them instruments that are more or less expensive than that. But I say to play as many instruments or bows as possible before you buy.
Whether you're looking for a new instrument or a new bow or that next step in your journey, A440 Violin Shop has got you covered. Look for them online at a440violinshop.com, and thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. This episode is brought to you by Steve Swan String Bass, and I've always been impressed by how Steve manages to get basses sounding so vibrant, whether it's a student-level bass or a top-of-the-line professional bass. Here's Steve on some of what he has learned in terms of setup.
When steel strings came into general use around 1959, the German bass makers flipped out, and they really got scared that they're going to get big shiploads of basses back that got wrecked by these high-tension steel strings. And so they did 3 things that really changed the function of the instrument. They shortened the string length, and they lowered the neck angle so the bridges weren't that tall anymore. And then they made the tops a lot thicker. They really wanted to ensure that these basses were not going to come back across the ocean for work anymore. And so the basses tend to sound kind of nasal, and they didn't have any depth. They didn't have a chest voice at all. Yeah. And so what we do with increasing the neck angle, and we can also increase the overstands for modern playing, can get up into thumb position a lot easier. So a neck reset can accomplish that. Sometimes we'll transplant a neck or make a new neck for these basses that might have a string length that are not friendly to modern playing.
Learn more about what Steve can do to get your bass playing better, and check out his great selection of basses at steveswanstringbass.com. And thanks for sponsoring the podcast, Steve. This episode is brought to you by the Texas Hill Country Bass Collective. Join them July 22nd through July 25th for their 6th annual Austin Bass Workshop. Come join friends from the area for 4 days of music, bass, and fun, and work with 2019 featured guest artist and former podcast guest Dennis Whitaker. Learn more at TexasHillCountryBassCollective.com. it's funny. It's great timing for us to chat right now. I had yesterday, I opened up my email and we were set to chat today, anyway, but I got a podcast listener named James Sandeman emailed me and he said, you know who you should interview? Olivier Babaz. Yeah, and you've got to and I was like, hey, guess what? Great minds think alike. And one thing he asked me to ask you about, and obviously it is just that bass and kalimba. Like, how did that idea come to you?
It's from my Reunion Island and Indian Ocean years. I really was influenced by a lot of South Indian Ocean music. So all the tradition from East Africa, Madagascar, Mauritius Island, Seychelles, Comores, Reunion, South Africa. And there are a lot of great music and there are some kora players there. It's not the kora per se, which is more West African, but there are some versions of the kora, and the kora is this kind of harp you play, and it has a non-consecutive tuning. So you get like do re mi fa sol la si do are not on the same side, and the kalimba, which is originated in the ones I use, is originated from South Africa. So it's kind of a cousin of the kora because it's the kind of same tuning pattern. So it's there. I just fell in love with this little hypnotizing instrument, and it's those instruments, when you put it on the surface, it resonates. So of course, the first thing I tried when I had my first kalimba was to put it on the double bass and to see what it did. And it was really nice and it was really magical. So from then I had to figure out all the problem, and I still have to figure out all the challenges of doing this, because it's a traditional instrument. So all the tunings are different and how you fix it, but it comes from being in a more African music environment and really loving that scene and that environment.
It's super interesting, and I love it's just like further evidence that you're on this, you're kind of on your own path, musical path, like bass and kalimba, what? But it's amazing, it works great, it's super cool. I'll make sure to link up to you playing and some videos and obviously your website, so folks should definitely check that out. And you were also talking with Geoff about gear, and I think your gigging instrument's a K, right? Like a K, like a 40s, 50s K, something like that? No.
It's just before it was bought by Engelhardt, so it's a 60s one.
Okay. And then,
great instrument.
Yeah. No, I sadly, when I moved to San Francisco, we had to I had too many instruments to move across the country. So I had a K around that vintage, maybe a little earlier, and had to get rid of it. But you were talking with Geoff, and I think this is an interesting concept about just thinking of the amp as a subwoofer more than anything. Like you're trying to stay as close to the acoustic sound as possible and just add a little subwoofer resonance via the amp if possible. Is that kind of
in a club setting, that's what I'm trying to do, because whatever comes out of the amp is, even when you're playing pizzicato, it's always very far from what the bass is doing, because it's not because of the quality of the pickup but it's not a microphone. It's not like using a sound signal. It's a piezo, so it's using vibration. So it's like when you listen to an electroacoustic guitar, just the pickup is very different from the guitar itself. So what I try to do is to play with the most optimal volume acoustically. So that means a little strong, but you don't have to hurt yourself. And the bass amp, I try to not notice it too much. So like I'm using, sometimes it's very extreme. The EQ I'm dialing on the amps, but sometimes I just use the bass and I just turn off all the highs, especially if I have to get the Arco out afterwards. I really don't want, if possible, to hear what comes from the amp when it's played with the bow. I mean, to me, there's no secrets. There's no great pickup. I mean, there are some great gear, but you have to get the acoustic sound the loudest possible.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean playing like a crazy, but it means two things. It means two things: having a technique that's adapted to that, and as well catching the ears of the audience and especially of your bandmates, and having them listening and respecting what you're doing, because you'll definitely lose the match against the drummer or any brass. I mean, we don't have, especially if you want to play acoustic, I mean, we don't have any resource compared to them. I mean, on a jazz gig, it can be very, very loud. So if you're playing in solo with your bow, you have to be able to really have them listening to you. Mm-hmm. So it's a technical and a musical thing to think about, to me.
You know, something that I'm paraphrasing. This is probably isn't exactly what you said, but on that video with Geoff, you made a comment about how staying inspired is as important, might even be more important, or about as important as practicing. Like staying inspired is as important as practicing. I think it was a sentiment like that. And anyway, that really resonated with me, because I think about that a lot too. Like I try to practice every day, but I do think that like I probably will get, it's probably as important for me to have this conversation with you right now and get all excited about the bass and new possibilities. Talk about that concept.
I mean, what you're describing is what we all go through at one point. We are all, I mean, both you and I are obviously really passionate about our instrument, and a lot of bass players are, and I hope, and that's great. But sometimes you want to practice, and you like practice by the watch, what I call by the watch. Like you put, okay, I'm doing a like 20 or 40 or 1 hour shot, and let's do something. And you're more into the technical stuff, and okay, I'm doing this. But sometimes this time can be really leveraged if you're nurtured by something deeper, if you're listening to anything that's really inspiring the day before, when you wake up, you're like, okay, I wanna absolutely explore that kind of thing, or I get to get this passage really great. I heard him playing that way, it's great. So it's just like nurturing the machine, because I mean, playing music, especially improvisation, but even of course, even in the orchestral world and everything, just nurturing the machine and not being one. That's weird to say that this way, but you know what I mean. The way you exactly told what I suggested. Just staying inspired is as important as continuing to work on your playing, on your composition and everything, because we're not dealing with something technical. It's we have to get life and passion into it. So that's what I think.
It's so important, and it's so easy to just sort of go on autopilot, and you don't want to put your musicality on autopilot. But
But sometimes it's the easiest path for a lot of us, and we have to fight against that. I got this nice routine I've been doing for like 2 months or 2 weeks, and it works well and everything. When I'm feeling like a little bit too comfortable within my practice routine, and like, it's good, I will like improvise around that mode and using that kind of, whatever rhythmic stuff I'm working on. When I'm a little bit too comfortable practicing, I mean, it means that, all right, I'm not like gaining as much as I could with that time.
Yeah.
So no, like for everything, no pain, no gain. But for music, I mean, if there's too much pain, it's counterproductive. So that's why the internet is great, because you just have to open whatever YouTube or anything and just type double bass anything, and it's, I mean, in a matter of minutes, you've got some incredible stuff. In you.
Oh yeah, it's easier than ever. Like I think about back when I'm 43, you know, and so like there was no YouTube when I was in college, and I just remember thinking about like how radically our world has changed, you know, in what seems like a few years to me, only a few years, but like I have to go to the Northwestern University listening library, and I have to write down a number and hand it to the person that go get an LP or a CD, you know, depending, and bring it out and put it on. And I put the headphones on. And just not, you know, this world now, take my iPhone, press a button. And I mean, there's so many beautiful things like people all over the world discovering what you're doing in your path and being able to follow along and learn. I mean, it's just transformed obviously everything, but the way that we learn and we can be inspired. There's also the overwhelm factor, of course, too. But
of course,
you know, it's so important for me, just like you were mentioning, to stay, you know, kind of like no pain, no gain in terms of staying inspired. For me, doing this podcast is kind of that. Like it forces me to get out of my shell and talk to someone that I might not know or talk about a topic. And so it inspires me. But like, you know, I remember looking at people that I was at university with, and the people that went out and saw concerts on a regular basis and were forming chamber groups and that sort of thing. I go 10, 20 years down the road. Those are the people that have these thriving, interesting careers. The people that just kind of stayed in their shell and practiced every Friday night, you know, at the music building. I haven't heard about them. You know, it's the people that I saw. You know, it's something I've noticed over the years.
I understand what you say. However, there has to be a lonely shell wood shedding part of it, and I mean, you know, and being inspired and listening to albums is great and everything, but at one point, you know, I don't have to tell you, you know, at one point you have to, you know, do the thing and put the hours and make it sound, I mean, correctly. Yes. At least.
Yes. Yeah. You gotta have that balance.
Yeah. I mean, it's a matter of hours you put in it, and there are ways to make it work better, but I mean, there's no secrets. I mean, if we're talking about the bow and the jazz thing, it's really, I mean, it really comes down a lot to how many hours you put in it as well. I think.
Oh, I agree. Yeah.
Like we all do. We all do. I mean, the classical players are really as well very crazy, and even the regular jazz bass playing. When you hear all those great players, I mean, people are. Yeah. Anyway, so it's just a matter of nurturing one with the other. Definitely. Practice needs to be lighted by something, and as well, you have to, if you want to yourself be inspired or even inspiring for other players you're with, or the audience, or even other people playing your instrument. I mean, you have to do the thing, but we all know that.
Yes, you got it. There's I forget the word in German. There's a great word in German. It translates to something like just like sitting power, like the ability to just like stay with something and work at it. Someone listening will know the word, but it's a great, very, very, you know, like I don't think we have that exact word in English, but like that, yeah, it's so important. But yeah, it's good to have that time fueled by, you know, inspiration, whether that's in the form of videos or going out and seeing concerts or listening to a conversation like this.
Absolutely, it's the French word is levier. I don't know if you can use the word lever in English in the same way, but it's the way to build synergy between your passion for music and your power for training or for practicing. It's just trying to make the most of it. And when you have a family, it's especially important to think about all that kind of time.
Yeah, we don't have kids, but I even feel like I never have enough time for what I want. That adds a whole other level of, you know, priority realignment, and those minutes become ever more precious, I'm sure. But obviously you're finding a way to do it because you keep on putting out interesting material and you've got this great career going. And hopefully this is the first of many chats. I love having people back like a talk show. I just had Renan Meyer of Time for Three back on, and I think this is his fourth time on the podcast. So hopefully we can do a round 2 soon, or a round 3. But maybe we could wrap up today. My only question I typically ask people is if you could go back and talk to, let's say, 18-year-old Olivier and give him some advice, knowing what you know now.
I'm gonna be honest and practice reading in treble clef and alto clef as well. Be fluent in all the languages is great. I mean, it's a mini thing, but I would do that. Yeah. I would practice more the treble clef and the alto clef.
Good.
So I'm more but it's a mini thing. Otherwise, metronome and never stop.
Good. I have a student who has been very resistant to learning alto clef. I'm going to tell her that you told me that was what you wish you'd told your younger self. Hopefully that will motivate her.
Yeah. Thank you. Can I just say a few words about the Discover Double Bass Pro? Just to say that it's coming out this week, and it's really very interesting. We got a great band playing, transcription, a lot of exercise. I hope you guys, and I hope you like it. We're trying something new for the format and even the content. So I hope people take a few time to check the videos out on YouTube and everything.
It's that people absolutely should, and it's well worth I've just been such a fan of what Geoff has been putting out. His recent course with John Gouldsby and David Allen Moore and Adam Ben Ezra and all the other people he's gotten involved. It's just like exactly what you'd want. And so I can't wait to check out what you put together. And
the production level is really, really, really good. I mean, he's really doing it for the long term, and he's doing a great, great, great job.
I've been learning so much from those courses. I've been using them for my own personal practice, going through and watching some of John's stuff and playing. And then I have a student come and say, "Hey, let's work on this thing I learned from John Gouldsby." And I know I'm going to be doing that with your course. So,
great.
Yeah. And
thanks.
So definitely we'll link up to that in the show notes. OlivierBabaz.com, I think, is your website. I'll link up to that, and social media, and yeah, really appreciate you taking some time. This has been a lot of fun. Olivier, thank you so much for chatting. Folks, find out more about him at olivierbabaz.com, and definitely check out this new course from Discover Double Bass. Super cool. And Olivier, we have to have you back for a round 2 and a round 3, and we barely scratched the surface. We could talk about kalimba and bass for another hour. We could talk about mindset for another hour or more, and all these techniques. We could spend an hour on each of them. I just love the way they're laid. I know that I'm going on and on in this opener and closure, but I just love the way these new courses are laid out on Discover Double Bass, and the quality, the production quality of these things. Oh my goodness, it's so good. We are living in interesting times. That goes without saying, but if we just think about education and how it's being transformed by this model of teaching, I mean, my goodness, I can't wait for the next 2-3 years in general with this technology, but especially to see what continues to come out from Discover Double Bass, such high quality products. DiscoverDoubleBass.com. Contrabass Conversations is produced by Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Trevor Jones, and Mitch Mooring. And Mitch is making beautiful basses in the Dallas area. Learn more at MitchMooring.com. And thank you to Krista Copper, a recent podcast guest. And Mitch is going to be on the podcast again with some other luthiers soon. But Krista goes through and catalogs and archives everything we talk about in this podcast. So helpful for so many reasons. More on that later. I'm your host, Jason Heath, and we will be back soon with more Life on the Low End of the Spectrum.